Welcome back, my friend. Tonight, I invite you to drift with me into the strange and sometimes unsettling world of medieval laws, a world where justice didn't always look like what we know today. Get comfortable under your blanket, close your eyes if you'd like, and let this story carry you through time, back to an age when the law was both sacred ritual and social control, a living force shaped by faith, fear, and human imagination. Let's start with how the medieval mind approached law itself. 037. Unlike modern legal systems that rely on consistency, precedent, and a sense of universal fairness, the medieval world saw the law as rooted in tradition, divine will, and moral order. Law wasn't just a list of rules to follow. It was an expression of how society believed the world should be, a reflection of deeply held ideas about sin, redemption, social standing, and the invisible threads that bound all creation together. It might sound bizarre now, but back then, people genuinely believed that divine justice would reveal the truth, not through careful investigation or cross-examination, but through symbolic acts that forced heaven's hand. The result was a system we'd find deeply irrational, even cruel, but one that felt perfectly natural to those living in the Middle Ages. Take the infamous animal trials, for example. 116-437. You heard that right. Animals could stand trial for crimes. In 1386, in Falaise, France, a pig was tried for the brutal crime of killing an infant. This wasn't a joke or village rumor. The pig was brought before a court, given a legal representative, and after a formal trial, it was found guilty and publicly executed, dressed in human clothing to symbolize its moral accountability. This wasn't an isolated case either. Animal trials took place across medieval Europe for centuries. If a pig killed a child, a bull gored a farmer, or insects destroyed crops, they could be prosecuted in front of the whole community. These trials were rooted in the belief that all of God's creation was bound by divine law. When that law was broken, even by a beast, justice demanded payment. Sometimes these proceedings took on almost theatrical dimensions, reinforcing moral lessons for everyone watching. And for the animals, there was no real defense. They couldn't speak for themselves, but they were appointed a lawyer anyway. It was ritual as much as law, a way to show that order was being restored. Medieval people didn't just put animals on trial, they also trusted God to reveal guilt or innocence through brutal ordeals. One common ordeal was the trial by hot iron. The accused would carry a red-hot bar of iron for a certain distance, usually 9 paces. Their hand would then be bandaged and re-examined after 3 days. If the wound healed cleanly, a miracle in an age with no antiseptics, they were declared innocent. But if infections set in, they were guilty. It's chilling to imagine how many people faced this trial, knowing that the odds were stacked against them from the start. Then there was the ordeal by cold water. The accused, bound and helpless, would be tossed into a river or pond. If they floated, it meant the pure water rejected their sinful body, so they were guilty. If they sank and drowned, they were innocent, but they didn't survive to benefit from the verdict. These rituals show just how deeply people trusted in divine intervention, even when it seemed terrifyingly unfair. As time passes in this story, you'll see that medieval law was full of such contradictions, harsh yet sacred, simple yet tangled in symbolism. And these contradictions bled into everyday life in ways we might find shocking now. Beyond the courtroom, medieval people faced other peculiar laws that shaped every aspect of survival. 830 to 1231. Food, the basic necessity of life, was far from safe. Bread, the staple of most medieval diets, was often stretched with cheap, harmful fillers like sawdust, ground bones, or chalk, just to make it look more plentiful. Bakers who were caught adding such things might face fines, but enforcement was sporadic at best. For the common folk, bad bread was just one more threat in a world already full of dangers. Ale and wine were just as suspect. Tavern owners watered down their drinks to maximize profits. For the poor, this meant paying for weak, sour ale that barely provided calories, much less comfort. And yet, food and drink were central to survival. One poor choice, one unscrupulous merchant, and a family could fall ill or worse. Even the rich weren't immune to the hazards of medieval food. King John of England, one of the most notorious rulers of his age, is believed to have died in 1216 after eating spoiled peaches. One meal gone bad, and a king's life was over. There were some rare bright spots though. Take Hildegard of Bingen, 1622 to 2432, a remarkable woman of the 12th century. She was an abbess, known for her deep knowledge of herbal medicine and nutrition. She championed spelt, an ancient grain, as a healthier alternative to common wheat, and she urged her nuns to bake wholesome bread not only for the abbey but also for the sick and poor in the community. In an age when food adulteration was rampant, her ideas were strikingly ahead of their time, an early glimpse of holistic nutrition that wouldn't become mainstream for centuries. Hildegard's work reminds us that even in an era of harsh laws and dangerous kitchens, some people were already planting the seeds for a healthier, more compassionate approach to food. As you let this story settle in your mind tonight, remember that every slice of bread you enjoy today, safe, fresh, and nourishing, represents centuries of progress. We owe it to generations past to appreciate the simple abundance that fills our tables now. Pause here with me for a moment. Breathe in the quiet, the lessons, the strangeness of these ancient ways. In our next part, we'll drift deeper into how medieval laws policed not just food and animals, but the very social order, from the rigid ranks of nobles and peasants to the spectacle of punishments that branded bodies and broke spirits. Now that you've settled in, let's drift deeper into the world where medieval laws shaped not just what you ate or how you worked, but where you belonged in the great social hierarchy and how you were punished if you stepped out of line. In medieval Europe, the idea that everyone could be equal before the law would have been laughable. 36 to 34, minus 40 to 31, the system was built to reinforce the power of the ruling class. Nobles saw themselves as inherently superior, ordained by birth and God's will. The law reflected that. If you were wealthy or titled, it served you like a protective shield. If you were a peasant, it loomed over you like a sword. And yet, these laws didn't just hover in dusty scrolls in some lord's chamber. They played out as public theater, often with the entire village in attendance. Imagine standing in a muddy village square, surrounded by neighbors, as someone accused of theft or heresy was brought forward. Before facing a trial by ordeal, the accused was expected to fast for days and attend special masses to purify the soul. The idea was that only a pure soul could stand before God's judgment. It was a performance of piety and submission, but beneath it all was raw fear. Everyone watching understood that the outcome could be a maiming, a branding, or worse. 48 to 52, 52 to 34, retribution, not rehabilitation, was the core of medieval punishment. The goal wasn't to help you atone and return to society. It was to mark you forever as a warning to others. For petty theft, you might lose a hand. For repeat offenses, you could be flogged or branded. For more serious crimes, the gallows waited. But even in death, class privilege reared its head. Nobles who faced execution often received the mercy of a swift, clean death, usually by beheading. Commoners, they were more likely to endure the slow, choking agony of hanging, sometimes before a jeering crowd. If you were rich enough, though, you could sometimes dodge these horrors. Wealthy defendants might negotiate a composition, a monetary payment in place of physical punishment. Or, if things looked really grim, they could simply flee to another lord's lands, where their reputation hadn't yet caught up with them. It's no wonder that the peasants who lived under this system saw the law not as blind but as very much for sale. 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 42 seconds, 1 hour, 8 minutes, and 43 seconds. And this unequal treatment didn't stop when you died. Even burial and mourning were wrapped up in the law. The wealthy were laid to rest in grand tombs within consecrated ground, surrounded by prayers and costly masses to speed their souls to heaven. For the poor, death was often as bleak as life, unmarked graves, no tombstone, no final blessing, unless some kind soul paid for it. In an age when the promise of paradise was a comfort against daily misery, the idea that a rich man's soul might soar while a poor man's spirit wandered was yet another reminder that class defined everything, even eternity. 1 hour 12 minutes and 35 seconds, 1 hour 20 minutes and 54 seconds, and the spectacle didn't end with the grave. Torture was a perfectly legal part of extracting confessions. Devices like the rack, the strappado, or the thumbscrews were used to force the truth, or what the torturers wanted to hear. Witchcraft trials were notorious for this. A burn, scar, or mole might be declared the devil's mark. A woman who didn't know how to answer trick questions could doom herself to the stake. In a twisted irony, the very pain inflicted often proved the accusations. and once you were found guilty, whether through ordeal, torture, or some biased witness, your punishment became another public show. Executions were spectacles. Bodies were left hanging or rotting on gibbets, reminding everyone who passed that breaking the law brought terrible consequences. These grotesque displays weren't just about punishing the guilty. They were about terrifying the innocent into submission. Now, step back for a moment. Imagine living in that world. Imagine trying to go about your day, tending your garden, brewing your ale, raising your children with the knowledge that a careless word or unlucky birthmark could bring the full weight of this system crashing down on you. 1 hour 32 minutes and 5 seconds. 1 hour 40 minutes and 20 seconds. Even what you wore was controlled by law. Sumptuary laws dictated which colors, fabrics, and styles were allowed for each social rank. Silk, rich purple dyes, or certain shades of red were reserved for royalty and high nobility. If a peasant dared to wear clothing above their station, they could be fined or humiliated in public. In this way, clothing became another tool to keep the social order intact. You couldn't just pretend to be someone you weren't. Your shirt, your sleeves, even the trim on your cloak told the world where you belonged, and in mourning, the rules continued. Widows faced elaborate legal requirements for what to wear, how to behave, and how long they could grieve. Excessive mourning might even be seen as a challenge to divine will. Too much grief meant you hadn't accepted God's plan. So the law didn't just police your body and life, it followed your feelings, your gestures, your tears. 1 hour 44 minutes and 19 seconds to 2 hours 23 minutes and 45 seconds. Even daily chores were policed. There were strict curfews to keep honest people inside after dark. Break the curfew, and you risked arrest. But the rules were vague, sometimes defined by the ringing of church bells or the judgment of the night watch. One man could be seized for leaving his home before dawn to bake bread, dragged to court despite doing legitimate work, and while the poor could be thrown in jail for violating these local ordinances. Watchmen who detained the wrong sort of person, someone above their rank, might themselves be punished for overstepping. The law was a tangled web of sacred duty and social privilege. Then there was marriage, finding a spouse who wasn't technically forbidden by the church's complex family. Tree rules became so hard that people paid for PayPal dispensations, essentially buying permission to marry a cousin or other relative. The rich could afford these legal loopholes. The poor, they often couldn't, so they lived together outside church sanction, in arrangements called handfastings, hoping that local custom would protect them if not the law. And so we see how every choice, your bread, your love, your tunic, your bedtime, was shaped by rules that claimed to be sacred but mostly kept the powerful in power and the powerless in place. This strange machinery of medieval justice seems almost absurd now, but it also shows us how far we've come, and why we fight so fiercely to keep justice fair, humane, and accessible to everyone. Close your eyes a little tighter now. Let these echoes fade into the dark as we drift into the next chapter. The hidden wisdom tucked inside this tangled web of ancient laws, the resilience, the small acts of defiance, the humanity that shone through. Let's keep drifting through the centuries, gently uncovering the human stories hidden inside these old, rigid laws. Because even in a world of punishments, trials by ordeal, and social cages, medieval people found ways to survive, and sometimes, to resist. One of the most revealing places to see this quiet defiance was in the kitchens and fields. 830 to 1231, remember how food was so often adulterated. For the poor, bread was life. It was the heart of every meal, yet bakers stretched it with chalk, sawdust, or ground bone to make a profit. People knew it was happening, and they grumbled, but they still bought it because they had no choice. The same happened with ale and wine. Taverns watered them down shamelessly, turning a drink that was supposed to nourish and cheer into something bland and useless. And yet, in every village, you'd find someone like Agnes, the fictional alewife, who stands for countless real women, who risked her livelihood by brewing a proper batch, refusing to cheat her neighbors, even when it cost her more and earned her less. That simple choice, to feed her community well, was an act of everyday resistance. And in times of famine, people broke the rules to stay alive. Lent's 40-day fast was a spiritual trial for the rich, but for the poor, it was often a deadly burden. They were told to give up meat and dairy luxuries they rarely had in the first place, while nobles feasted on fish and spices brought from afar. In 1322, a woman named Agnes Paston was dragged before the court for stealing bread during Lent. She wasn't a hardened criminal. She was a mother trying to feed her starving children. She knew the penalty could be severe, but hunger left her no choice. Her story, lost to time but found in dusty court records, reminds us how deeply these old laws punished the desperate while protecting the comfortable. Even in monasteries and convents, where rules were strictest, a few brave souls tried to push back. Hildegard of Bingen didn't just preach about nutrition and healing. She argued that the body and soul were one, that food and medicine could be holy work. She wrote letters to bishops and popes, demanding better care for the sick and poor, and her nuns baked high-quality bread for the community, long before any government thought to inspect a bakery. In a world where rotting meat could kill a king, as it did King John of England in 1216, the idea of making safe food was radical. It challenged bakers who cut corners, tavern owners who watered down ale, and the powerful who shrugged at the suffering of the hungry. These small rebellions, honest bread, secret help for starving families, nuns baking for peasants, might seem ordinary now, but they were sparks of humanity in a harsh world. As the centuries moved on, the people living under these laws began to ask uncomfortable questions. Why should the rich be able to buy their way out of punishment, while the poor were branded and flogged? Why should a pig get a lawyer when a peasant could be tortured? Why should a widow's grief be policed by the church? Slowly, these questions became movements. Townspeople formed guilds to protect honest bakers, alewives, and farmers. Some lords and clerics tried to clean up the worst excesses, introducing early food regulations, the ancestors of our modern health codes. Over time, the idea grew that law should protect the weak as much as it protected the powerful. But the struggle was long. 36 to 34, minus 42-31. Medieval Europe's entire hierarchy depended on everyone staying in their place, and the laws were written to make sure they did. Trials by ordeal, torture chambers, branding irons, all served as reminders that rebellion would be met with pain and shame. Sometimes, though, the people turned the system's cruelty into defiance. Public punishments were supposed to humiliate criminals, but crowds could turn ugly. They booed unjust judges, pelted corrupt officials with rotten vegetables, or even helped an accused neighbor escape before a sentence could be carried out. Such small uprisings were rare and risky, but they whispered that ordinary folk knew when the law was unfair, and that they wouldn't always bow their heads. 1 hour 4 minutes and 42 seconds, 1 hour 8 minutes and 43 seconds, even in death. The poor found ways to challenge the system's grip. They couldn't afford lavish tombs, but folk traditions sprang up to honor the dead with candles, songs, and prayers given freely by neighbors. These grassroots rituals ensured that even the humblest soul could find peace, despite the church's rigid rules about burial and masses for the dead. 1 hour 12 minutes and 35 seconds to 1 hour 20 minutes and 54 seconds. Witches, too, were rarely the evil figures painted by inquisitors. Many were healers and midwives, women whose knowledge threatened both church and state because it gave them power outside the official hierarchy. Though many were tortured and killed, they left behind an underground legacy of herbal wisdom that lived on in whispered recipes and secret gardens. Think, too, about the apprentices bound to masters who could sell their labor, forbid them from marrying, or even pass them on in a will. Some apprentices ran away, starting new lives in distant towns where no one knew their names. These runaway stories spread, feeding the hope that you didn't have to accept your lot if you were clever and lucky enough to slip through the cracks. 1 hour 32 minutes and 5 seconds. 1 hour 40 minutes and 20 seconds. Sumptuary laws tried to trap people in visible class cages, but markets found ways around them. Smugglers and rogue tailors secretly made forbidden fabrics for those bold enough to wear them. In a world where your sleeve or cloak trim told everyone what you were worth, donning an illegal piece of silk could be a quiet rebellion, a way to say, I am more than this law says I am. Even curfews were tested. Bakers, brewers, and blacksmiths worked odd hours. A man like Thomas, seized before dawn for tending his bread ovens, might have the entire neighborhood testify on his behalf. Ordinary folk uniting to argue that the law was wrong this time. By the time these ancient rules faded, they had sparked centuries of protests, small reforms, and slow shifts toward fairness. Each tiny act of defiance became a thread in the tapestry that, centuries later, we would call human rights and justice for all. So, as you lie here tonight, imagine the candlelight flickering in those Madan thatch huts. Picture the quiet deals, the smuggled silk, the honest bread. These were the seeds of a better world. Let these whispers guide you deeper into rest. When you're ready to continue, we'll trace how these hidden rebellions and the harsh lessons of the past shaped the idea of justice we hold so dearly now. Here we go, drifting further into the shadows of the past, a place where every flicker of fairness had to push through layers of cruelty and superstition to survive. As we lie here tonight, let's unearth how the medieval obsession with punishment, order, and spectacle eventually laid the groundwork for the more balanced idea of justice we defend today. First, imagine what it felt like to stand in the middle of a town square, surrounded by your neighbors, staring at the gallows or the whipping post. 48 to 52 minus 52 to 34, these places weren't hidden out of sight. They were right there, at the center of community life, stark reminders that anyone could be next. Punishment was meant to be seen, heard, and feared. It was a warning: cross the line, and your body will bear the marks forever, or worse, your body will hang for days as a feast for the crows. Branding irons sizzled flesh, not just to inflict pain but to make sure the shame never faded. A branded hand told everyone that you'd stolen. A missing ear or finger spoke volumes. To the lords and judges, these signs of pain were necessary. Society needed them to function. But to the people forced to watch, they were also fuel for quiet questions. Did this really make us safer? Did it truly make the world more just? Those seeds of doubt grew slowly, but they never stopped growing. Generations passed them down, whispering that there must be a better way. When people couldn't question the system outright, they poked holes in it from the inside. Even the church, so powerful and deeply entangled with the law, had its doubters. Some priests and monks began preaching that mercy and forgiveness might serve God better than iron and rope. A few brave clerics even intervened to save the condemned, offering sanctuary, paying fines on behalf of the poor, or pressuring nobles to commute harsh sentences. And yet, for all its talk of mercy, the church also added new layers of control. The same church that blessed bread and baptized babies also sanctified the ordeal. 36 to 34 to 40 minutes and 31 seconds, trials by fire or water were cloaked in ritual. Fasting, masses, holy relics laid on the accused. The entire village might gather at dawn to watch a man's hand unwrapped to see if God had healed it. The spectacle was meant to bind everyone together in a shared belief that divine power would reveal the truth. But more often, it sowed fear and resentment, especially when the truth didn't feel right. And so, the tide began to turn. When trial by ordeal was finally banned in the early 13th century, it wasn't because people suddenly became more compassionate. It was because too many lords and bishops realized that these tests didn't actually deliver consistent verdicts. The absurd idea that a red-hot iron or a cold pond could reveal the will of heaven had begun to crack under its own weight. The end of the ordeal marked one of the first big steps away from superstition and toward what we might call rational law. But rational didn't always mean fair, not yet. 1 hour 4 minutes and 42 seconds, 1 hour 8 minutes and 43 seconds. The new systems that replaced the ordeal were still built on harsh inequality. Wealthy criminals paid fines, poor ones paid in flesh. A noble who killed a peasant might offer silver to the victim's family. A peasant who stole bread could be hanged. So public punishments continued, and so did the spectacle. People gathered in droves for executions, not because they were cruel, but because it was one of the few times when the hidden power of the law came into full view. It was shocking, yes, but also thrilling in a strange way. There were songs, vendors selling ale and pies, children sitting on shoulders to get a better look. The community turned suffering into theater, but every now and then, something unexpected happened. A crowd might turn against the executioner, shouting that the sentence was unjust, or they might see themselves reflected in the condemned, a petty thief, a hungry mother, a farmhand accused on flimsy evidence. These moments didn't always spark a riot or a revolution, but they planted tiny ideas. If the law can be wrong here, what else could be wrong? 1 hour 12 minutes and 35 seconds to 1 hour 20 minutes and 54 seconds. Torture chambers and inquisitions darkened these flickers of hope. In the witch hunts, pain was turned into policy. Women and sometimes men were tortured until they confessed to impossible crimes. Even a birthmark could doom you if an inquisitor called it the devil's mark. But the sheer horror of these practices eventually triggered a backlash. Over time, philosophers and reformers began to argue that torture didn't uncover truth, it created lies. People would say anything to stop the pain. These thinkers, early skeptics and humanists, kept records, wrote letters, and whispered their doubts to students and patrons. It took centuries for their arguments to change the system, but each letter, each sermon, each scribbled pamphlet nudged the world closer to the idea that justice should be based on evidence and reason, not superstition and cruelty. 1 hour 32 minutes and 5 seconds to 1 hour 40 minutes and 20 seconds sumptuary laws, too, became a point of quiet rebellion. Laws that dictated who could wear silk, who could don purple, who could mourn in black, for how long these rules were supposed to lock the social ladder in place. But in the bustling streets of London, Florence, or Paris, merchants and tailors found loopholes. Black markets for forbidden fabrics flourished. Servants wore their masters' caste. A peasant might save for years to buy a bit of trim that made him look like a man of means, just for the thrill of fooling the watchful eyes of the law. Each tiny act of dressing above your station was a statement. I won't be pinned down forever. 1 hour 44 minutes and 19 seconds. 1 hour 56 minutes and 21 seconds curfews, too, were defied. Night watchmen prowled the streets, seizing anyone found out of bed after dark. But bakers rose before dawn. Brewers tended barrels at odd hours. Shepherds tended lambing used by moonlight. Some got caught and fined, like Thomas in Canterbury, who was arrested while gathering wood to heat his ovens. But the people knew who he was and what he did for them, and they spoke up. Sometimes, the community's loyalty outweighed the rigid rules. Sometimes the human bond was stronger than fear. These moments of quiet resistance, these whispered doubts and open acts of kindness, they add up. They remind us that justice didn't evolve overnight. It crawled forward, pulled by people who refused to accept that pain and punishment were the only answers. So, as you rest here with me tonight, remember that we are the heirs of those unmarked graves, that hidden bread, that stolen piece of silk. Every time we demand fairness, every time we defend someone too weak to defend themselves, we're finishing the work they began centuries ago. Let your breath slow now. Let this gentle truth cradle you into deeper sleep, and when you're ready, I'll be here to take you further to the final chapters, where medieval echoes remind us why we must never stop protecting the fragile idea of justice. Drift with me now, deeper into this old, cold world, where every rule, every punishment, and every moment of mercy tells us something about how far we've come, and how fragile true justice really is. Imagine the night air of a medieval town, the distant clang of a blacksmith, the murmur of priests in stone churches, the heavy hush of secrets people kept to survive the laws that watched them at every turn. We've talked about the punishments and the spectacles, the trials by ordeal, and the torture chambers, but what about the everyday life that kept ticking along beneath this harsh surface? 1 hour 56 minutes and 21 seconds to 2 hours 7 minutes and 53 seconds. What about the families who loved each other? The neighbors who shared bread? The young lovers who faced rules that tried to dictate who they could marry? Finding a spouse in medieval Europe could be like navigating a maze of rules. The church banned marriage within certain degrees of kinship, but when everyone in a tiny village was distantly related somehow, it became nearly impossible to find someone allowed. Wealthy families bought papal dispensations, official permissions from the Pope himself, to bend the rules. But the poor, they did what they always did. They found another way. Many couples formed hand-forcing unions, informal marriages recognized by local custom, but not always by the church or the courts. A man and woman might live together for years, raising children, sharing a home, never formally wed. If they were lucky, the community protected them. If they were not, they were vulnerable to accusations of immorality, or worse, losing all rights if the union was challenged. 2 hours, 4 minutes, and 0 seconds to 2 hours 7 minutes and 53 seconds. Apprenticeships were another cage, though they promised opportunity. A young boy might be bound to a master craftsman for years, with no right to wages, no permission to marry, and no way to leave unless the master agreed. In return, they got food, shelter, and the chance, just the chance to learn a trade that could free them one day. But not everyone survived the brutal discipline or the endless work, and if the master died or sold their contract, they could be passed along like livestock. Within homes, power imbalances played out in other, more hidden ways. Family violence was not only common, it was largely considered private. Medieval law, so quick to punish theft with branding, so eager to drag animals to trial, often looked the other way when it came to domestic cruelty. A husband could beat his wife or children with few consequences, unless it was so severe that it spilled out into public view, and even then, punishment was rare. Imagine the fear and silence that grew in homes where the church taught obedience, but offered little protection. Imagine the quiet resilience of mothers shielding children, of neighbors slipping bread under doors, of tiny kindnesses that never made it into the legal records, but were acts of resistance all the same. And yet, through this mess of harsh rules and invisible lines, some seeds of a better idea took root. 2 hours, 7 minutes and 53 seconds to 2 hours, 16 minutes and 5 seconds. The belief that law should protect, not just punish, that it should heal, not just wound. These ideas flickered in the sermons of compassionate priests, the letters of philosophers, the hidden actions of townsfolk who looked out for each other even when the system didn't. By the late Middle Ages, thinkers began to argue that torture, so long used to force confessions, didn't reveal truth at all. They saw that a man could lie under pain just to end his suffering, that an innocent could be condemned because they didn't know the right answer to the inquisitor's tricks. The trial by hot iron, once so sacred, looked absurd when you realized that an infected wound could kill you regardless of your guilt. This shift didn't come easily. For centuries, people clung to the idea that God would intervene directly in human affairs, that divine judgment would shine through the ordeal's fire or the cold water's embrace. But as the world changed, as cities grew, as trade routes spread, as knowledge flowed, people began to see that maybe, just maybe, truth required more than pain. 2 hours, 16 minutes and 5 seconds to 2 hours, 19 minutes and 56 seconds. Still, these old systems lingered. In some corners of Europe, trials by ordeal or other divine tests continued long after they were banned elsewhere. Superstition and tradition die hard, but the cracks were there. The seeds were sprouting. A few brave voices risked their freedom or their lives to write pamphlets, to teach students, to stand in courts and argue that there must be a better way. And slowly, painfully, the idea spread that justice should be blind, not only to a person's rank, but to their wealth, their family name, their power, that the truth should be found in evidence and reason, not in bloodied hands and broken bones. We don't always remember their names, these early skeptics, these local heroes, these secret rebels who pushed against the darkness of torture, chambers and gallows, but we carry their legacy every time we demand a fair trial, every time we question authority, every time we stand up for someone who has no one else to speak for them. So, as you drift deeper, feel the warmth of that legacy wrap around you like a blanket. Feel how fragile it is, and yet how strong, because each generation has tended it, kept it alive, and handed it on. In our next part, we'll look at how all of this, the bread, the branding irons, the hidden mercy, the open defiance, comes together to remind us why we can never take true justice for granted. Stay with me as we slip even further into this old world, the cold stone walls, the flickering torches, the distant toll of the church bell marking the hours when a village fell under curfew. Imagine standing there, a peasant in muddy boots, wondering if you'd be stopped on your way home and accused of breaking a law you barely understood. In the medieval mind, time wasn't just about the sun or the stars. It was another lever of control. 1 hour 44 minutes and 19 seconds to 1 hour 56 minutes and 21 seconds. Curfews were everywhere, meant to keep honest folk indoors once darkness fell, because darkness, they believed, was when mischief and sin woke up. Watchmen prowled the streets with heavy staffs and lanterns, ready to drag anyone caught wandering back to the bailiff. Sometimes, the system turned on itself. Thomas the baker, for instance, he wasn't a criminal, but a hard-working man who rose before dawn to light his ovens. The law didn't care. The night watch seized him, accused him of violating curfew. He found himself at the mercy of a bailiff. Whim, his entire living threatened, because he dared to gather firewood before first light. But the real twist, different towns had different ways of measuring the moment when night officially began. Was it the ringing of the church bells, the position of the stars, the judgment of a sleepy watchman? That confusion opened endless loopholes and endless abuses. Communities sometimes rallied behind men like Thomas, Neighbors testified for him, swearing he wasn't up to no good but simply feeding the village. These moments were fragile but powerful, a reminder that people could bend the law back toward fairness, if only for a heartbeat. And that's what so much of medieval daily life looked like, a constant negotiation with the rules that governed every moment of existence. 1 hour, 56 minutes and 21 seconds to 2 hours, 7 minutes and 53 seconds. Find a spouse. Make sure you're not too closely related, but if you are, and can't afford the Pope's blessing, you live together anyway and trust your neighbors to accept your union. Want to leave an apprenticeship? You can't, unless you run away in the night and disappear into a city big enough to swallow your name. Every corner of life was shaped by these rigid frameworks. Marriage, family, work, even what you wore when you mourned. Did you know mourning itself was once a legal affair? Laws told widows exactly how long to grieve, what clothes to wear, how they should behave in public. Excessive mourning could be seen as challenging God's will, an insult to divine order. And so the law didn't just touch your actions, it reached inside your heart, your grief, your fear. 1 hour 32 minutes and 5 seconds to 1 hour 40 minutes and 20 seconds. It dictated what color you could wear, what fabric you could afford, what trim you could flaunt on your tunic. A peasant who dared to wear silk or the deep, royal purple reserved for kings could face heavy fines or public shame. And yet, black markets thrived. Smugglers traded forbidden cloth. Tailors stitched hidden luxury into plain cloaks. And so, even the simplest tunic could become a quiet rebellion. These everyday cracks in the system mattered. They showed that people understood what was fair and what wasn't, even when they didn't have the words we use now: equality, due process, human rights. They simply knew when something felt wrong, and they found ways, big or small, to push back. Still, for every hidden silk sleeve, there were public horrors to keep people afraid. 2 hours 16 minutes and 5 seconds to 2 hours 19 minutes and 56 seconds. Torture didn't fade quickly. The idea that pain could reveal truth clung on like a sickness, passed down through generations. An accused person might be forced to carry a red-hot iron bar for 9 paces. The ordeal by fire. Their wounds, festering and untreated, would decide guilt or innocence. Infection was inevitable. The outcome was rarely just dot or consider trial by water. Bound and thrown into a river. The accused prayed not to float, because floating meant the water rejected their sinful soul. But if they sank, they might drown before anyone could drag them out. It was faith in the cruelest sense, a faith that said suffering would cleanse the world of lies. Over time, the loudest minds of the age, philosophers, reformers, and even brave priests began to say what villagers had whispered for centuries: this isn't truth, this isn't justice, it's just pain. A cracked bone can't testify. A drowned woman can't defend herself. These voices didn't always win. Some were silenced. Some were burned as heretics themselves. But they left behind a ripple. Each parchment, each letter, each smuggled idea was a seed. It grew into new courts, new laws, new ideals, ones that insisted truth must be proven with reason and evidence, not by branding, irons or ropes. But the legacy of those dark trials remains with us. The idea that power can twist the truth, that fear can silence the innocent, and that law, without compassion, becomes its own kind of prison. So as you lie there tonight, warm and safe, think of how your life would have felt under these rules. Your hands might carry scars from an ordeal. Your clothes would reveal your station before you spoke a word. Your grief would be timed, your love scrutinized, your hunger policed. Now breathe deeper and see how far we've come. Justice still stumbles. Power still hides behind titles and gold. But we know, now, that the law should be a shield, not a branding iron. When you're ready, I'll be here to guide you through how these echoes still shape us, and why remembering them is our best protection against repeating them. Close your eyes a little tighter now, and let's wander through the final, quieter corners of this old world, the parts that whisper not just about what was cruel or strange, but about what was deeply human. Picture a medieval village, on the edge of a forest, a handful of thatched huts, a tiny church where people gathered, not just to pray but to find a sense of order in a world that often felt chaotic and unfair. Even here, the law was everywhere, woven into the bread you ate, the ring you exchanged in marriage, the tunic you wore, the hours you kept. Remember how we spoke about the curfews? 1 hour 44 minutes and 19 seconds to 1 hour 48 minutes and 15 seconds. They weren't just about keeping people safe from crime. They were rooted in a deep suspicion of the dark. Nighttime was when witches were said to dance, when demons prowled, when the purest villagers might be tempted by the devil's tricks. So the law said, stay inside, obey the bell, trust the watchmen, even when they turned their staffs on the innocent, like Thomas the baker. But in these small hours, resistance still glowed like embers. Some villagers challenged curfew arrests by arguing that the bell rang too early, or the watchman lied. Some towns even appointed official timekeepers to settle these disputes. Men who carried sundials and watched the stars so the powerful couldn't twist the clock to suit themselves. Even here, you can see the roots of something more modern. The idea that fairness needs clear, agreed-upon rules, not just the whims of the rich. And what about when the sun rose again? 1 hour 48 minutes and 15 seconds to 1 hour 56 minutes and 21 seconds. Daily life was still a maze of strange rules. In the markets, sumptuary laws forced tailors to police who could buy what widow who wanted to wear her late husband's best cloak might be fined if it was lined with velvet or dyed in royal purple. A young farmhand who saved his wages to buy a fashionable hat could be shamed publicly if it was a style reserved for knights. These clothing codes sound absurd now, but they were deadly serious. They kept each rank pinned in place, a visible reminder that you were not meant to dream too big, but dream they did. 1 hour 32 minutes and 5 seconds to 1 hour 40 minutes and 20 seconds. People found ways to sneak past these barriers. Black markets for forbidden cloth, secret tailors who sewed hidden linings of silk under plain wool, merchants who smuggled purple dyes meant only for the king's robes. A single illegal hem might seem trivial, but it was a tiny rebellion against a world determined to trap you in your birth. In homes, too, the law crept into every corner. Mourning was scripted down to the color of the veil, the length of the grief, the words spoken at the church gate. And yet, folk traditions bubbled up around these rules. Candlelit vigils, secret prayers, songs sung in the dead of night. Ordinary people found their own ways to grieve, to say goodbye, to bless the dead who had nothing but an unmarked grave. 2 hours, 0 minutes, and 8 seconds, to 2 hours, 7 minutes, and 53 seconds. And then there was marriage. The church taught that marriage was sacred, but it was also a tangle of rules and fees. Finding a spouse who wasn't a forbidden cousin was so difficult that rich families paid for PayPal dispensations, like indulgences at the market. The poor, as always, made do. They created handfastings, binding their love with a simple spoken vow, trusted and recognized by the neighbors even if the priest looked the other way. Some of these couples stayed together for life. Some were torn apart by lords who saw profit in controlling marriage alliances, apprentices forbidden to wed, or laws that said your children might be declared illegitimate if your union didn't pass church inspection. These harsh lines made family into a kind of battlefield, another place where people had to push back, bend the rules, or break them just to be together. All these small acts of survival, the hidden bread, the forbidden silk, the runaway apprentice, the stolen kiss, wove a quiet resistance into the fabric of daily life. Medieval people weren't just victims of a harsh system. They were also its quiet critics. Their actions, their whispered doubts, their folk customs were the first cracks in the walls that centuries later would tumble down. And while kings and bishops clung to the idea that the law was sacred because it came from God, the people living under that law knew a deeper truth. When a rule ignores compassion, it loses its holiness. When punishment becomes a show of power instead of a path to fairness, it poisons the community it claims to protect. By the time the Middle Ages gave way to the early modern era, these quiet rebellions had blossomed into louder voices. Scholars translated old laws into common tongues so ordinary people could read them, a radical idea at the time. Townsfolk wrote petitions demanding better treatment. Judges, once the unchallenged servants of lords, found themselves pressured to answer to communities who understood their own rights, even if they couldn't read Latin or hold a parchment in their hands. And through all this, something remarkable happened. The idea of justice started to shift from a ritual of fear and spectacle to something that looked just a little like the fairness we expect today. 2 hours 16 minutes and 5 seconds to 2 hours 23 minutes and 45 seconds. Trials by ordeal and torture slowly faded. They didn't disappear overnight, but each time a town or kingdom banned these practices, it sent ripples outward. Each ripple said, "We are not beasts, we don't drown people to find truth. We don't break bones to hear confessions. We don't trust hot iron or icy ponds to do the work of an honest investigation." It was a long, painful journey, and it's not over yet. Even now, we know justice can still fail. Power can still twist truth, but when you trace that fragile thread all the way back through the centuries, you see that every time we stand up for fairness, we stand on the shoulders of villagers who risked shame for a hidden silk lining, mothers who defied fasting laws to feed starving children, apprentices who ran into the night for freedom. So as you breathe in this last whisper of old laws, remember, the past isn't just behind us. It lives in the rights we defend, the questions we ask, and the stubborn hope that law should protect, not crush. Close your eyes now, rest easy, and when you're ready, we'll take the next gentle step together. The final echoes of this strange, haunting world and the lessons it carved into our bones. Settle in now, because this last stretch takes us into the deepest chambers of what these old laws truly left behind. The shadows that still flicker in our modern sense of justice. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear the echo of church bells calling curfew, the hiss of branding irons, the murmured prayers of peasants gathering under candlelight to bury their dead without permission. We've walked through how medieval law tried to rule every breath, your food, your clothing, your love, your grief, but it didn't end at the gallows or the stocks. It crept into how people saw each other, and how they came to question what a fair society should even look like. Think of the young girl accused of witchcraft. 1 hour 20 minutes and 54 seconds to 1 hour 24 minutes and 38 seconds. She might have nothing more suspicious on her skin than a birthmark or a scar. The inquisitors called it the devil's mark, and torture was used to force her to confess to dances with demons, curses cast in moonlight. The truth was simpler. She was poor, maybe outspoken, maybe just inconvenient to someone powerful. These trials didn't just destroy lives, they left generations terrified of stepping outside the invisible lines drawn by the church and the lords, but they also planted seeds of doubt. Each senseless accusation made people whisper, if an innocent can be hanged as a witch, who's safe? If a birthmark can kill you, what is truth worth? 1 hour 24 minutes and 38 seconds to 1 hour 28 minutes and 22 seconds. Records were another tool of control. Nobles kept careful legal documents, paper trails that defended their claims, lands, and privileges for generations. They could afford scribes and clerks to record every ruling that went in their favor. But the poor, they had no parchment, no seal, no one to preserve their version of events. So, when conflicts arose, the scales were already tipped. The ink of the powerful became more real than the voice of the powerless. Sometimes, that voice never made it past the gallows. People were marched to execution sites, paraded through towns to remind everyone, this is what happens if you challenge the order. The condemned were often denied final words, denied burial, their bodies left hanging in cages for crows to pick apart. Even in death, the shame lingered as a warning. But even here, people resisted in quiet ways. Folk tales grew around these lost souls, turning them into half-saints, half-ghosts, reminders that the law could kill your body but not always your memory. Some villagers snuck out at night to cut down the bodies, bury them in secret, say prayers the church refused to offer. When you peel back the layers, you see that medieval law was never just about enforcing rules, it was about reinforcing power. The rules about who could wear purple, who could light their oven before dawn, who could mourn, and for how long. They all said the same thing: know your place. And if you forgot it, the punishment would make you remember. Yet within this cold machine, human stubbornness kept shining through. 1 hour 32 minutes and 5 seconds to 1 hour 36 minutes and 24 seconds. The sumptuary laws about clothing grew so ridiculous that by the 14th century, people found endless ways to bend them. A peasant caught in silk might claim it was a gift, or say the dye was accidental. Tailors became expert at hiding forbidden fabrics beneath plain exteriors. What began as a show of wealth became a tiny rebellion, a way for the poor and the rising merchant class to say, we are more than what you decree. Even grief became an act of quiet defiance. Widows who were told not to mourn too long sometimes wore black for years anyway, a silent protest against a world that dictated how many tears were acceptable. Families who couldn't afford lavish funerals made their own rituals. Songs passed down through generations, candles burned in doorways to guide spirits home. In a time when the powerful tried to own even the afterlife, these small flames were acts of hope. 1 hour 36 minutes and 24 seconds to 1 hour 40 minutes and 20 seconds. The same happened with food. The church and the crown passed laws about what you could eat during Lent, how your bread should be made, who could brew ale. But hunger has always been a teacher. When the laws failed to feed people, communities fed each other. Secret gardens behind huts, hidden batches of stronger ale, bits of meat tucked into stews. These quiet refusals said, "We will survive you." Then there were the strange cases that showed just how blurry the lines could be. The story of Thomas, seized for breaking curfew while gathering wood for his bakery, 1 hour 44 minutes and 19 seconds to 1 hour 48 minutes and 15 seconds, is one of many. When the night watch dragged him in, the whole neighborhood knew they'd overstepped. The system turned on itself. The baker was fined for violating the curfew, but the watchmen were punished too for daring to arrest a man of good repute, someone higher up the fragile social ladder than they were. Moments like this remind us that medieval law, for all its iron grip, was also a constant negotiation, a tug-of-war between written rules and the unwritten code of community. Loyalty, 1 hour, 48 minutes and 15 seconds. 1 hour, 56 minutes and 21 seconds. Darkness was feared. It hid outlaws and spirits and witches, but it also gave cover to quiet acts of kindness. A stolen loaf of bread passed through a shutter. A runaway apprentice smuggled out of the village. A forbidden burial performed by moonlight. If the daylight belonged to the lords and priests, the night belonged to the ordinary people who kept each other alive. When you think about it, this contradiction runs through every medieval law. The same hands that raised gallows also fed the hungry. The same voices that condemned witches told folk tales that kept their memories alive. The same villagers who bowed before the Lord's court sometimes turned around and mocked him in market gossip. These contradictions are the heart of the story, because when we tell ourselves that the past was only cruel and ignorant, we miss the truth. The seeds of fairness, compassion, and resistance were always there. Stubborn as weeds in a field, nobody wanted them to grow. So rest here with me for a moment. Let the strange, brutal, beautiful contradictions of the Middle Ages remind you that every right you have now to speak freely, to marry for love, to mourn your own way, to wear what you like was shaped by people who didn't stop asking, "Why should it be this way?" When you're ready to let these final echoes settle into your dreams, I'll be here to guide you through the last flickers of this tale, the way these ancient struggles still linger in our modern laws and art, while remembering them is our quiet promise to protect what they fought for. Sink deeper now, into this gentle last stretch of a story that winds through cold castles, dusty village lanes, and the hushed prayers of people who learned to live inside the walls of the law, and sometimes to slip right through its cracks. As you drift, think again of the strange machinery that made up medieval justice. It wasn't just the spectacle of trials by fire or the public branding of a thief. It was the everyday hum of rules that turned the simplest moments, what you wore when you stepped outside, whom you loved, into acts that could be praised or punished. 1 hour 56 minutes and 21 seconds to 2 hours 7 minutes and 53 seconds. And yet, while the system was designed to hold people in place, it couldn't fully tame them. Human hearts are stubborn things. Even the harshest law couldn't stop a baker from rising before dawn to feed his village. It couldn't keep a mother from slipping an extra crust to her hungry child during Lent, risking fines or worse. It couldn't stop a widow from wearing her black shawl years longer than the church decreed, just to honor her grief her own way. 2 hours, 0 minutes and 8 seconds to 2 hours 7 minutes and 53 seconds. Families bent the rules to make life bearable. Couples formed hand-fasting unions, practical, defiant love matches that ignored the church's maze of forbidden kinship. Some apprentices slipped away in the night, leaving behind a master's house that treated them like property, chasing freedom in distant towns that didn't know their name. And when the law tried to bury the dead in shame, the living found ways to bless them anyway. Secret graves, whispered prayers, tokens slipped into rough coffins so that no one left this world empty-handed. These were the cracks in the walls. Each small act of defiance carried forward an idea we almost take for granted today, that law should serve the people, not just those in power. When we think about justice now, we like to picture it as blindfolded, a noble figure holding balanced scales. But in the medieval world, justice was no such thing. It had eyes, sharp ones, always watching. It didn't hide its bias. If you were rich, you paid a fine. If you were poor, you bled. If you were noble, you might die quickly. If you were common, you might hang for days while the village watched. 2 hours, 16 minutes and 5 seconds to 2 hours, 19 minutes and 56 seconds. This was the reality that made each quiet protest matter so much. Every runaway apprentice, every hidden loaf, every forbidden bolt of silk worn by a daring peasant, they all carried the same message forward. Power can be questioned. Rules can be bent when they crush more than they protect. And the truth is not always what the gallows says it is. Slowly, painfully, these seeds took root. People began to write down these questions. Philosophers and early reformers argued that torture didn't reveal the truth, it destroyed it. They whispered that a trial by fire or water was no better than leaving truth to chance. Their words traveled with merchants, monks, and students, each new copy of a book or letter, spreading a spark of doubt in places where the old ways still held tight. And so, when you read history books that tell you medieval people were ignorant, remember this: they were not fools. They knew that branding a man for stealing bread didn't stop hunger. They knew that dressing a pig in human clothes and hanging it for murder wouldn't bring back a child. They understood the cruelty. They just didn't yet have the power to change it all at once. But they did what they could. In kitchens and taverns, in midnight fields and secret marriages, they tended these small sparks of fairness until they became the fire that warmed the modern world. 2 hours, 19 minutes and 56 seconds to 2 hours, 23 minutes and 45 seconds. And here's the lesson that hums like an old lullaby through every law we still hold today. Never forget where it came from. The idea that you cannot be tortured into confessing, that you can't be punished for what you wear, that you can't be thrown in a river to see if you float. These are not just obvious truths. They are the scars of centuries of suffering and the triumphs of countless people who refused to accept that the way it's always been was good enough. So as you lie here tonight, letting the final echoes of this old world fade, remember that the story isn't finished. You live in the future they fought for, and you carry the quiet duty to guard what they left behind. The law should never again become a branding iron for the poor and a shield for the powerful. Justice should never again seek truth in broken bones. Take a breath. Feel the softness of your blanket. Taste the simple miracle of knowing that no one can drag you to the square at dawn to prove your innocence by flame or water. Let your body relax, heavy with the gentle knowledge that history is a promise we renew every day. Never again, not if we can help it. And as your mind drifts into sleep, know this: the past is not just behind us. It's the soil under our feet, the roots that hold up the tree of every freedom we enjoy. May we tend those roots well. For the bakers, the widows, the witches, the mothers, and all who dared to dream that a kinder world was possible. Take one last deep breath with me as we reach the gentle close of this journey, a final step through the cold, winding corridors of medieval law and into the quiet dawn that followed centuries of ordeal, suspicion, and public shame. We began this story with the strange trials of pigs in human clothes and villagers forced to carry red-hot iron bars to prove they weren't liars. We traced how people were tossed into freezing rivers, left to sink or float while neighbors watched in horror. We saw the bread stretched with sawdust, the watered-down ale, the church's grip on who could love whom and how they should mourn. But for all the cruelty carved into these rules, what stays with us, just as strong, is the small human courage that never quite died out. 2 hours, 16 minutes and 5 seconds to 2 hours, 19 minutes and 56 seconds. Think of how often medieval villagers found loopholes, the hidden spelt fields grown on abbey lands to feed the sick, the secret batches of unwatered ale brewed by honest tavern wives, the tiny pieces of silk stitched inside a peasant's plain coat, invisible to the eyes of the local watch. These were acts of hope, just as powerful in their own way as the king's decrees or the church's sermons. They said, "This world is unfair, but we can make it better. If only in this corner, this day, this small kindness." It's easy to scoff at how they believed a scalded hand could reveal the soul's innocence, or how they thought the purity of water would judge a woman accused of witchcraft. But behind those ordeals was a question still alive today. How do we know the truth? How do we protect it from the powerful? 2 hours, 19 minutes and 56 seconds to 2 hours, 23 minutes and 45 seconds when we finally abandoned the trials by ordeal and the chambers of torture. It wasn't because people suddenly woke up smarter overnight. It was because generation after generation felt the cost of living in fear. Villagers saw innocent friends suffer. Judges saw too many confessions squeezed out between screams, only to fall apart in the daylight. The doubt grew louder than the fear, until the rituals that once felt sacred began to feel monstrous. In that slow turning of the wheel, we see a lesson worth carrying close. Justice is not a stone monument. It's a garden. It must be weeded, watered, tended. It must be guarded against the old poisons that sometimes creep back in fear. Cruelty, the temptation to control by shame instead of reason. You and I, lying here now in a world so different, and yet still stitched to that past, are part of the same story. Each time you question unfairness, each time you speak for someone silenced, each time you stand up for the truth over a convenient lie, you're one more hand tending that ancient, fragile garden. So breathe in the quiet now. Feel how far you are from the raw iron brand, the curfew bell, the whisper of inquisitors hunting for devil's marks. Let your heart be soft but your mind alert. Those old shadows never vanish completely. They curl around the edges of our laws. Today, testing if we're paying attention. That's why we remember, not to cling to horror stories, but to honor the resilience that built something better, slowly, painfully, but surely. And in that remembering, we find a promise, that the baker's early fire, the widow's long mourning, the hidden loaf, the stolen kiss, they weren't wasted. They became the soil from which your freedom grows. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, let this gentle truth settle deep inside you. The story is yours now. Protect it, share it, make sure that no one, rich or poor, ever again has to prove their innocence with burned hands or sunken lungs. Make sure the law stays a shield, not a cage, and make sure that when the darkness comes, as it always does, we remember what the villagers of old knew in their bones. The night belongs to us, too, and kindness will find a way. Sleep well, dear listener. May your dreams be free of branding, irons and cold water trials. May your waking hours honor the old courage that brought us here. And if you ever want to wander back into these candlelit stories, you know where to find me. Before you drift off completely, let's linger just a little longer in this quiet space between past and present, where the echoes of those medieval laws remind us not just how far we've come, but how easily we could forget the lessons, paid for with so much pain. Think for a moment about how these strange laws shaped trust itself. In medieval villages, trust was a fragile thing, a coin minted every day by what you did and who would vouch for you. 1 hour 48 minutes and 15 seconds to 1 hour 56 minutes and 21 seconds. The law didn't protect the weak, it protected the powerful. If you were poor and accused of theft, you might stand alone. If you were rich, you brought a priest, a bailiff, maybe your family's long record books that spoke louder than your neighbor's testimony. Yet, time and again, people risked their own safety to stand up for each other. They spoke for the baker dragged out at dawn, or the girl accused of witchcraft, whose only crime was being different. They whispered the truth when the officials turned away. These moments remind us that justice isn't just something handed down from a judge's bench or a king's decree. It's something people carry in their hearts, and sometimes that's the only place. It survives until the world is ready to see it. 2 hours, 0 minutes and 8 seconds to 2 hours, 7 minutes and 53 seconds. Think of the apprentices, bound by contract, forbidden to marry without permission, forced to work years for a master who might treat them well or might not. Some of them stayed, some endured, but many slipped away in the dark, becoming ghost names on old parchment. Did the law catch them? Sometimes, but the cities were growing, the roads were wild, and the human desire to be free has always outrun the strongest chains. The same spirit breathed through the sumptuary laws that tried so hard to freeze people in their place. Imagine being a farmhand, pockets lined with coppers you'd saved for years, daring to buy a fine cloak, only to be told you weren't allowed to wear it. The law said your status must show on your sleeves, your hem, your collar, but the human spirit said no. And so smuggling cloth, dyeing forbidden colors, hiding silks beneath rough wool, These became quiet revolutions woven into everyday life. 1 hour 32 minutes and 5 seconds to 1 hour 40 minutes and 20 seconds, and when the church dictated mourning, how long a widow could weep, what color she could wear, when she must move on, many simply didn't listen. The grave might swallow a husband or a child, but it could not swallow love or sorrow. The old songs that carried grief became more powerful than any parchment decree. These stories show us that law can guide a society, but it can also betray it. And when it does, people improvise. They find cracks to slip through, shadows to hide in, candles to light when the watchman looked away. 2 hours, 16 minutes and 5 seconds to 2 hours 23 minutes and 45 seconds. We have our own modern rituals now. We trust that truth is found through facts, not flames. We believe that you cannot be forced to prove your innocence by carrying hot iron or floating in a river. But we still see echoes of those old injustices in the way power sometimes shields the wealthy, or how people without means can slip through the cracks of a system that should protect them. The old ghosts linger: fear, corruption, inequality. Yet every time someone stands up and says, "No more," they are part of that same long line of villagers, bakers, midwives, apprentices, and mothers who whispered the same thing beneath the brandings, beneath the curfews, beneath the church bells ringing for a justice that never quite felt just. So tonight, as you breathe a little deeper and let your thoughts grow soft, promise yourself to remember this: every law we have is alive, only as long as we care for it. And when the scales of justice start to tilt toward cruelty, our duty is to lean them back. Let the image of that medieval marketplace fade, the barrels of watered ale, the loaves filled with chalk, the crowds gathered for a hanging, and instead, hold on to the baker who rose before dawn to feed his neighbors, the neighbor who spoke up in court for the falsely accused, the father who taught his child that truth doesn't need torture to stand, the mother who fed the hungry in Lent when the law said she shouldn't. These are the ancestors of your own sense of right and wrong, the part of you that knows a just world is never perfect, but always worth fighting for. So breathe out now. Let this story settle in your bones like an old folk song. And when you wake tomorrow, carry that quiet promise forward. You are the guardian of a freedom someone once hid under their cloak, smuggled in bread dough, or buried in secret with an unmarked grave. May your dreams be gentle, and your spirit always stubborn enough to remember. The law belongs to us, not the other way around. Rest easy now, but stay with me a little longer as we tie together the final threads of this long, quiet tapestry. This is where the story of strange medieval laws slips from the shadows of the past and settles into the soft light of what you and I hold dear today. Picture again that medieval town, the narrow lanes, the church spire, the market stalls where every measure of grain might be suspect, and every jug of ale might be watered down. And above it all, an invisible net of rules, curfews, sumptuary laws, trials by ordeal, cruel punishments. These weren't just quirks of a bygone age. They were the foundations that defined who had power and who did not. Yet, even back then, people could see the cracks. Las 2:16:05 menos 2, las 7:56 de la noche. They might not have had our words for it: human rights, due process, equality before the law. But they had something just as strong, an instinct for fairness. When the rich could buy their way out of a punishment that would brand a poor man's flesh, neighbors grumbled. When a pig stood trial dressed in a shirt like a man, villagers gathered to watch, but went home wondering how that could possibly make sense. When a baker was seized for tending his ovens too early, people spoke for him, reminding the bailiff that justice, if it served anyone, should serve those who fed the town. The laws changed, piece by piece, because people refused to accept that cruelty was the only way to keep order. They wrote letters, told stories, sang songs, passing down the memory of injustice so the next generation could do better. And they did, or at least, they tried. 1 hour 20 minutes and 54 seconds to 1 hour 24 minutes and 38 seconds. The end of the trial by ordeal didn't come from a sudden wave of kindness. It came because lords and priests alike realized that these divine judgments were failing. Too many wounds festered. Instead of healing, too many innocent people sank to the bottom of cold rivers. Too many questions hung in the air long after the crowd had drifted home from the gallows. So the system shifted toward something more like what we know now: trials with testimony and evidence, not just superstition and fear. Torture, though, took longer to die. In some places, inquisitors clung to it, the rack, the thumbscrews, the devil's mark on a widow's shoulder. It took centuries for enough brave voices to stand up and say, pain cannot speak the truth. And while the courtrooms changed slowly, the market stalls and village homes changed too. La 1:32, and 05, menos 1 and 4, la 0:20. A peasant who slipped a forbidden trim onto his coat helped chip away at sumptuary laws that divided rich from poor with cloth alone. A family that ignored strict mourning rules reminded the church that no one could dictate how the human heart should break. A mother who fed her children during Lent taught everyone watching that a law that starves the innocent is no law at all. Bit by bit, these small acts made the mighty seem less untouchable. The lords who wrote the rules discovered that you can threaten all you like, but when enough people quietly refuse to obey, the rule begins to lose its teeth. So here we are now, lying in a world that those small acts helped build. When you sign a petition, when you stand up for someone mistreated, when you speak a truth that someone wants hidden, you're not just doing something new, you're carrying on an old rebellion. 1 hour 44 minutes and 19 seconds to 1 hour 48 minutes and 15 seconds. Even today, we have our own versions of curfews, watchmen, and rules that sometimes feel like they protect power more than people. And still, the same questions linger. Who do these rules really serve? Do they protect the baker, up before dawn to feed his neighbors? Or do they serve only the people who sleep easy, knowing the punishment will never fall on their heads? That's why these medieval echoes matter. They remind us that justice is fragile when we let fear make the rules. They remind us that a ritual, no matter how sacred it feels, must be questioned if it causes more harm than good. They remind us that fairness is a practice, not a guarantee. So tonight, as your thoughts begin to slip further into sleep, hold this last image in your mind: the old village fading under moonlight, the watchman's lanterns swinging, the baker's oven glowing. The villagers shut their doors against the cold, but inside their small homes, they share bread that no one watered down, wear sleeves they stitched for themselves, and mourn in whispers that no priest could forbid. These simple acts are what freedom has always looked like: quiet, defiant, human. You live in the promise they made without ever knowing your name, that the law should be more than a whip or a branding iron. It should be the fence that keeps harm out, not the cage that traps the innocent within. So rest now, knowing you're part of that story, the long, unfinished, stubborn tale of people who kept asking, what if we made this fairer? What if the law belonged to everyone? Here we are, deep in the gentle close of this journey, where the last flickers of torchlight fade, and we stand in the quiet dawn of what came after. You followed the winding roads of medieval Europe, through curfew bells and branding, irons, forbidden silk hems and hidden bread ovens. Now, let's sit with what these old stories leave behind for us to carry. Picture once more that village square. By daylight, it might have looked peaceful. A handful of market stalls, neighbors trading gossip, kids chasing each other around the well. But underneath, everyone knew the truth. Order came with a blade behind it. If you crossed the invisible lines, punishment wasn't just likely, it was spectacle. Branding, maiming, hanging, these weren't hidden away. They were right there in the open, meant to burn a lesson into the minds of everyone watching. 1 hour 48 minutes and 15 seconds, 1 hour 56 minutes and 21 seconds. And yet, while punishment was meant to frighten people into obedience, it did something else, too. It showed them who the law really protected, and who it did not. Every unjust branding, every trial by ordeal that drowned the innocent or spared the guilty, planted a seed. Maybe there was a better way to hold each other accountable. That seed took centuries to bloom, and it never grew perfectly straight. 2 hours 0 minutes and 8 seconds to 2 hours 7 minutes and 53 seconds for every bit of progress. There were new ways for power to twist the rules. Records kept the powerful safe, but they often trapped the powerless in cycles of debt, servitude, or silence. Even when trial by ordeal fell away, corruption didn't vanish with it. But the idea that the law should be rooted in reason, in evidence, in compassion was out there now, too strong to be snuffed out by fear alone. So the peasants who watched a neighbor branded for stealing bread remembered. The apprentices who slipped away at night, escaping masters who owned their labor and marriage rights, remembered. The widows forced to hush their mourning remembered, and they passed these memories on in stories, in folk songs, in quiet lessons, whispered to children at bedtime. 1 hour 32 minutes and 5 seconds to 1 hour 40 minutes and 20 seconds. Sometimes, the church tried to reshape these old customs. Sometimes, kings wrote new decrees to stamp them out. But the people kept holding the truth tight in the soft spaces between the lines. The law should not just be a tool of power. It should protect the helpless. It should feed the hungry. It should respect the grief that doesn't fit neatly into a prescribed script. Even centuries later, these quiet beliefs shaped revolutions big and small. When early philosophers and humanists started to write that no man should confess under torture, that truth does not grow from agony, they echoed the doubts medieval villagers had carried in their bones for generations. 1 hour 44 minutes and 19 seconds to 1 hour 48 minutes and 15 seconds. And while curfews, sumptuary laws, and absurd dress codes eventually fell away, the instinct to police people's worth through appearance never fully vanished, but so did the instinct to resist it. Each time someone puts on what they shouldn't wear, each time a new voice refuses to be boxed in by an old category, they echo that peasant who sewed forbidden silk into his cloak, a small, beautiful reminder that who you are should never be decided by the color of your sleeves. What's striking, too, is how much community mattered. Even under brutal laws, people didn't always stand alone. They spoke for Thomas the baker when the curfew guards dragged him out too soon. They whispered mercy for a widow who broke Lent to feed her children. They risked being marked as troublemakers, because they knew that silence is how cruelty thrives. These medieval echoes hum through our world today. You see them in every court that demands fair evidence instead of confession under threat, in every movement that says you should not suffer more just because you're poor, in every neighbor who steps in when someone is treated unjustly. 2 hours 16 minutes and 5 seconds to 2 hours 23 minutes and 45 seconds, you see it, too, when people fight to protect records and laws from being twisted by those in power. Medieval nobles kept written rights to guard their land, and the poor were left voiceless. So now, we treasure the idea that rights must be visible and equal for everyone, not hidden away in some lord's locked chest. The power of record-keeping, once a tool of the few, became a safeguard for the many, but only because people fought for it to be so. This is why these old stories still matter. They remind us that every freedom we hold is built on the hard lessons of the past, and that those lessons were paid for by people whose names we will never know. Villagers who pushed back in whispers, who defied curfews, who smuggled grain under the noses of watchmen, who turned the harsh machinery of medieval justice into a forge for a better idea. So as you lie here, letting sleep come closer, hold on to this. The law can be a chain or it can be a bridge. It is never just words on parchment. It lives in the daily choices we make to stand up for each other, to question what seems unjust, to speak when silence would be easier. The medieval mind might have believed that order was worth any cruelty, but the medieval people, the real, living, breathing people, they taught us something better, that kindness, fairness, and truth can't be forced out of someone's broken body. They must be chosen, protected, and passed on. Breathe now. Feel how the cold stone of those old walls falls away, replaced by the warmth of what they left behind. The right to be heard, to be safe, to be equal under the law. No matter how much gold lines your sleeves, when you're ready to close this final chapter and carry this old wisdom forward, I'll be here to finish this gentle walk with you. Let's stay in this quiet space a little longer. The space where the harsh clang of medieval iron fades into something softer, a lesson, an inheritance, a reminder that every just law today was once just someone's dream, whispered in defiance, behind closed doors. Close your eyes now and picture it, a village after curfew. A watchman's lantern swinging in the dark, the faint glow of a baker's oven behind shuttered windows. Inside those homes, bread rises in clay ovens, candles burn low, and old stories are told, stories that carry warnings and hopes woven together. 1 hour 44 minutes and 19 seconds, 1 hour 48 minutes and 15 seconds. These people knew the weight of strange laws in their bones. They knew what it felt like to see the powerful twist rules in their favor, while the poor paid with flesh, coin, or freedom. But they also knew that survival, true survival, wasn't just about obeying. It was about remembering who you were underneath the rules, and so they kept secrets. The hidden grains Hildegard's nuns grew to feed the sick, the scraps of silk smuggled under a farmer's tunic, the love stories that bloomed between people who technically weren't allowed to marry. They bent the rules, broke them quietly, trusted neighbors more than nobles. They asked each other, "Is this fair?" long before they had any power to change it on paper. That simple question is the golden thread that runs through every era. Is this fair? 1 hour 48 minutes and 15 seconds, 1 hour 56 minutes and 21 seconds. The same thread that once wound through cold monasteries where monks copied laws they couldn't read. It now winds through your life, too. Each time you read a headline about injustice, each time you vote, each time you speak for someone too tired to speak for themselves, you're answering that same ancient question. Because the truth is, cruelty always finds new shapes to wear. Back then, it was the branding iron and the ordeal by hot iron. Now, it might be a system that favors the loudest or the richest, a loophole that crushes the small voice in the room. The ghosts of medieval justice stand behind us, whispering, "Remember, remember that the law must be watched, shaped, and questioned. Remember that fear should never be its only tool." 1 hour 32 minutes and 5 seconds to 1 hour 40 minutes and 20 seconds. Think of the sumptuary laws again. The strange idea that your sleeve or hem could decide who you were. We may not have laws about velvet trim anymore, but the instinct to judge worth by what someone wears, owns, or carries is stubborn. The peasants who wore forbidden silk under rough wool remind us we are never just our clothes, our coin, or our class. The soul of fairness is the belief that your dignity does not come from your status, but from your humanity. And what about mourning? Those old rules that dictated how many tears were acceptable, how many weeks you could wear black. 1 hour 40 minutes and 20 seconds to 1 hour 44 minutes and 19 seconds. The church claimed it was to guide people back to life, but those who defied it knew better. Grief is not a sin to be measured out like flour. Love can't be decreed. So they sang old songs by grave mounds, lit candles, in secret, carved names into hidden stones. Their small rebellions said, "This sorrow is mine, you cannot own it." Even today, we echo that same defiance whenever we say, "I will remember how I choose, I will grieve as I need." The freedom to hold your memories close, unpoliced by someone else's idea of decency. That, too, was born in the shadows of medieval laws. And underneath all of this runs the simple, radical truth. The law is not magic, it's not divine. It's made by people, enforced by people, and most importantly, it can be remade by people when it fails them. 2 hours, 16 minutes and 5 seconds to 2 hours 23 minutes and 45 seconds. So as you rest here, safe and warm where no one will drag you from your bed at dawn to prove your innocence with a burnt hand, promise yourself this. Keep asking the question they once whispered behind closed doors. Is this fair? Does this protect? Or does it punish? Does it bind us together? Or does it divide us? Because the final gift these old villagers, bakers, midwives, and apprentices leave us is not just the horror of branding irons or the absurdity of pigs on trial. It's the quiet, enduring proof that people can bend the arc of justice toward mercy, inch by inch, generation by generation. So lie back now, let the flickering images fade, the night watch, the flickering forge, the whisper of silk sleeves, until all that's left is the soft knowledge that fairness is an ember you must tend. May you carry it gently, may you feed it truth and courage, may you pass it on unbroken. And when you're ready to take this final thought into your dreams, I'll be here to wrap this long night's tale with one last gentle promise. Here we are, drifting at the very edge of this long journey, where the last echoes of medieval courts and curfews dissolve into the hush of your own quiet thoughts. Let's gather these scattered fragments together one final time, so you can carry them forward like a candle that never quite goes out. Picture the world we've walked, through village squares where animals stood trial, bakers punished for rising too early, women drowned to prove innocence, peasants fined for the crime of wearing cloth too fine for their station. 1 hour 44 minutes and 19 seconds to 1 hour 56 minutes and 21 seconds. It's easy to look back and think, how strange, how backward. But the truth is, those laws didn't survive centuries by being useless. They survived because they served someone. They kept power where power wanted to stay. But it's also true that they didn't last forever, because they rested on a lie, that order needs fear to stand. And that lie cracked every time a neighbor spoke up for the baker, every time a mother fed her child forbidden food, every time a widow mourned longer than the church allowed. Think of that, 1,000 small acts of human stubbornness, flickering, like torches in the dark. They were never loud revolutions, they were candles passed hand to hand, night after night, generation after generation. 1 hour 56 minutes and 21 seconds to 2 hours 7 minutes and 53 seconds. Those candles still burn inside you now, whether you notice them or not. They're the reason you expect truth to be tested by facts, not flames. They're the reason you believe no one should drown just to prove they don't speak with devils. They're the reason you feel something deep inside you bristle when someone tries to say your worth is written in the clothes on your back or the money in your pocket. We still live with the echoes of old injustices. Power still tries to guard itself with complexity, loopholes, fine print, shadows in which cruelty can hide. But each time you ask the simple question, is this fair? You keep the promise made in dusty village squares and torchlit courtrooms. That law must never again be spectacle without mercy. 1 hour 32 minutes and 5 seconds to 1 hour 40 minutes and 20 seconds. Look at sumptuary laws. They taught us how those at the top fear the blur between classes more than almost anything. They taught us that controlling how people look, what they wear, who they love, is about more than fabric and marriage contracts. It's about reminding you where you stand. And every peasant who wore that forbidden silk, every apprentice who ran from his contract, they remind us, you get to decide who you are, not the law, not the priest, not the lord at the top of the hill. Think, too, of the watchmen who arrested men like Thomas for tending fires before dawn. The curfew was supposed to protect people from the dangers of the night, but often it protected the powerful from the poor, gathering together in the dark. And yet, even that control cracked when the village stood up and said, he feeds us. He's done no wrong. 1 hour 44 minutes and 19 seconds to 1 hour 48 minutes and 15 seconds, 2 hours 16 minutes and 5 seconds. 2 hours 23 minutes and 45 seconds. These stories remind us that real justice doesn't live on parchment alone. It lives in how people hold each other up when the law turns cruel. It lives in how we watch the watchmen, how we keep an eye on those who claim to protect us, because we know what happens when fear writes the rules and no one says stop. So as you lie here, eyes soft, breath easy, feel this truth settle in you like warm bread. You are the keeper of the same fragile dream they carried. A dream that says the law must never become so sacred that we forget to ask whether it still serves the living. A dream that says fairness is not a favor handed down by the powerful. It's a right we guard together. May you remember the strange lessons tucked inside these old dusty laws, that you can dress a pig in a shirt and call it guilty, but it doesn't make sense. That you can test truth by hot iron, but you're more likely to kill it. That you can lock people in a class, a tunic, a curfew bell, but there will always be someone brave enough to break free. So sleep tonight under the same quiet promise that carried bakers, widows, and midwives through the worst of times. Kindness, fairness, and courage outlast every cruel decree. And you, in your small modern life, are their living echo. When you're ready, I'll be here for the final part. A last soft step out of the medieval dusk and back into your world, where the candle stays lit because you keep it so. This is the gentle final step, the soft close of our long walk through a world of strange laws, branding irons, hidden bread, and quiet defiance. You've wandered the cobbled streets of medieval villages, felt the cold iron of ordeals, heard the echo of curfew bells, and watched the stubborn flame of human fairness burn through it all. So now, lie still and let this last part settle deep. If you remember nothing else, remember this. The people who lived under these laws were not so different from you. They felt the same hunger for dignity, the same bone-deep knowing when something was wrong, the same quiet bravery when kindness cost them more than silence. Picture Thomas the baker one more time. It's just before dawn. He's up before the rest of the village, gathering wood to stoke his ovens so the people can eat. A watchman seizes him for breaking curfew. The law says he must be punished, but when he stands before the bailiff, the people come. Men who've eaten his bread when famine loomed, mothers who fed his loaves to their children. They stand beside him and say, "This man feeds us. This law is wrong this time. This is what has always kept justice alive, not the parchment, not the robes or the seals, but people willing to say no when the law forgets its purpose. 2 hours 16 minutes and 5 seconds, to 2 hours 23 minutes and 45 seconds when the trials by ordeal vanished. It wasn't because rulers woke up one morning with softer hearts. It was because too many people knew in their bones that burning a hand or drowning a woman was not truth, but terror. Each infected wound, each drowned innocent, each forced confession left scars not only on bodies, but on the trust between neighbors. And trust, once cracked, becomes a seed for change. So here you are, centuries later, living in the world their courage helped make possible. You might never carry hot iron to prove your innocence, but every time you stand up when rules are unfair, every time you protect the truth instead of bending to fear, you're that same baker's neighbor, that same peasant with forbidden silk stitched under rough wool. Look at how the smallest rebellions echo the black market silk that mocked sumptuary laws. It lives on in every person who refuses to be boxed in by status or class. The widow who mourned longer than the priests allowed. She's in everyone who says, "My grief is mine to carry, not yours to measure." The runaway apprentice. He's every voice that leaves behind chains and writes a new name for themselves. It is tempting sometimes to see these old laws as distant relics, laughable, absurd. But the past is never just behind us. Its shape lives in every debate about who deserves protection, who gets to speak, who the rules really serve. It's there each time we see power trying to hide behind the same old tricks, fear, spectacle, shame. That's so as you drift off tonight. Know this, you are not small because you are one voice. You are large because you stand in a line that stretches all the way back through torchlit courts and hidden gardens, through curfews and cold cellars, through small acts of mercy that cracked iron laws open just enough for light to get through. The villagers who fed each other during forbidden fasts, the women who planted grains for the sick when the Lord's fields were locked, the fathers who paid fines to save neighbors from branding. They did not know your name, but they dreamed of a world that looked more like yours than theirs. So carry that world forward. Ask, always, is this fair? Stand, always, where can I protect? Speak, always, when silence would be easier but wrong. In this way, the strange laws of medieval Europe become more than a bedtime curiosity. They become a reminder that order without mercy is just fear, and fear, unchecked, can never hold us forever. Rest now. You've walked far, back through the centuries, carrying a light those villagers first lit when they asked, "Can this be better?" It can be, it always can be. And you warm, safe, thoughtful, you are proof. Sleep well. May your dreams be gentle, and may you wake tomorrow knowing that the law belongs to the people, as it always should. Good night, keeper of the old flame.